So let's end the meditation with this short reading from John Main, which is very relevant to our theme for Ash Wednesday. He says, the experience of sin is the experience of self-centeredness, being locked into oneself as a monad, an isolated being, and living the nightmare of finding only distorted images of this illusion wherever we look and in whoever you meet. Conversion, or metanoia is the Greek word that we translate as repentance, or repent. Jesus says, turn around. It means literally for the mind to turn around, to see things from a different angle. So conversion of mind, or metanoia, are both words that express the dynamic that liberates us from this nightmare and summons us to wakefulness, to the pure light of day. They both express the positive, decisive, other-centeredness of penance in its dynamic of turning from self-obsession and self-analysis. Authentic conversion is discovering our center not in ourselves, but beyond ourselves in God. There is another kind of negative penance, which is a downward spiral of self-obsession and self-analysis. But authentic conversion is discovering our center in ourselves, not just that, but beyond ourselves in God. So that's really what I'd like to say as a kind of a commentary, really, on that. But looking at it particularly today in the light of the journey of meditation that we are beginning, or we are re-beginning today. I met an Indian Hindu woman today who told me that she always observes Lent. She fasts every day during Lent. So I said, are you not a Christian? She said, no, I'm not a Christian. I'm a Hindu. But I love Mother Mary and Jesus. And she's attracted to this discipline, or this practice of observing Lent, because she said, not because I've done anything wrong, or I'm a bad person, I don't think that, but she said because it helps me from becoming bad, and she said it feels purifying and refreshing to me, both physically and, the most important, mentally and spiritually. So I think I was impressed by both the directness and the enthusiasm and her insight into what the time of penance that we associate with Lent is supposed to be about. And I think it's very intuitive. I think it's very natural for us to do this, as she understood. Fasting, or as we call it today, dieting, is intuitive. We know, we feel, our body tells us, or our habits tell us, that we need to respond to a new standard of health, of well-being, of wholeness, of equilibrium, a new balance. And we intuitively understand that to get back to this balance, to this resetting of our minds and bodies and spirit, we need to reduce, not to add so much as to reduce, to cut back, to moderate rather than to go to extremes, and to purify. Now, what matters, of course, is our motivation for that. In dieting, your motivation is your self-image. What do you look like when you look in the mirror, or what do you think other people think of you when they look at you? Or it may be some other more subtle things, but usually it's related to that kind of self-image. But when we approach this time of moderation, of fasting, of reduction, of simplification, when we approach it with a deeper motivation, not just our self-image, but because we want to know ourselves better, and to know that knowledge of ourself leads us into the knowledge of God. We want to come to a kind of self-image that isn't just an ego projection, what I look like and what people think of me, but to a kind of self-image where we realize that we are in fact sharing in the life of God, that we are, as the Bible tells us, an image of God, a living icon, not just a photographic image, but a living icon of the divine, that is who I am actually. And at my best, when I'm most awake, when I've woken up from this nightmare of self-centeredness, this is how I know myself, and I know myself in God. And I know that my self-knowledge is really a reflection or the beginning of God's knowledge of me. So a lot depends simply on your motivation, what lies behind this intuitive desire to purify, to simplify, to reduce, to focus. And when we look at it like that, you say, well, what's so special about Lent? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing all the time? And that's actually what St. Benedict says. He says the life of the monk should be a perpetual Lent. And that, if we misunderstand it, suggests that the life of the monk should be pretty miserable. And but if we transpose that to the life of a meditator should be a perpetual Lent, and we understand Lent as this practice, this specific and focused, intentional practice, something we decide to do. It's a decision, as John Main says, a decisive turning of our mind off ourselves. It's a decisive intention to go this way, to keep up this practice. And then Lent takes on a different kind of complexion. It's a kind of spring cleaning. Okay, it's a specific 40 days, but we observe these 40 days intentionally, as well as we can, in order to be aware, to refresh our minds, and to be aware that this is a continuous practice, a continuous, meaningful exercise in our lives. Traditionally, in the Christian life, this is a tradition that goes back to the very early Christians, before the institutions began to form. The Christian life itself, or the ascetical aspect of it especially, was seen in terms of three practices: fasting, almsgiving, and prayer. And again, this could be seen in negative terms, or it could be seen in terms of liberation. John Main, in that passage, describes a liberation from this nightmare of self-centeredness. So, let's just reflect on what those three practices might mean for us. Fasting, in a sense, means, of course, giving up something. it's not only moderation, but maybe returning to moderation by giving up some excess, or just giving up something because it feels to be the right thing to do, that it would be liberating for me to do it. Not because I want to hurt myself, punish myself. That's a completely perverse idea of penance, that we come closer to God by inflicting pain on ourselves. It's only one step away then from saying that we'll bring other people closer to God by us inflicting pain on them, which is a rather dark side of Christian history and the history of most religions as well. So it's not about, in any way, the purpose is not about pain. The purpose is liberation. So it is a good thing to reflect on what you might give up during Lent. Crisps. What? Somebody gave up crisps. What? Oh, that May. Sorry, I thought you meant the other May. Crisps. Oh, well, that's a little bit of austerity. Won't do her any harm. So, what are any other? Would anybody like to share what they're giving up? Chocolate. You've done that for a long time, I'm sure. Anybody giving up alcohol for Lent? It's a good thing to do, yeah? And you? Yes. And? Anybody else? No. You're on camera, I should tell you. What? Just an illustration. You can make it up if you like, actually.
Social media.
Social media? Really? No, I don't believe it. Completely.
Apart from work.
Yes, of course. Apart from your work here. Yeah. Yes. Very. Okay, yes.
Negative thoughts in the morning.
Negative thoughts in the morning. How are you going to do that?
Jump out of bed rather than lying.
That's a good idea, yes. Yes, get going quickly. Very good, yeah. So, giving up something that you know is not good for you, or holds you back, or keeps you in a state of attachment or sadness. Okay, then almsgiving. So if fasting is about giving up, almsgiving is about letting go. Letting go of something you have, such as money, but also what else can you let go of that you have in your possession? Time, yes. What? Books. Okay, giving away books. Yes, I would find that very difficult to do. Yes. What? Pride. Yes, letting go of one's pride. Yes, good. What's that? Listening. You're going to let go of listening. Okay.
Are we giving now as opposed to letting go?
What's that?
Are we giving something?
Well, yes, but the giving is the letting go. I mean, I think it's easy to give, but not let go. For example, you give a gift to someone, but you treat it as if it, you act, maybe unconsciously even, in such a way that it puts them in your debt, or puts them, they owe you one, or they're under your obligation to you. So the letting go is, I'm giving this, and there are no strings attached. Absolutely. I don't even want your thanks. So anonymous letting go is very, perhaps and what does Jesus say? Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So don't be observing yourself too much when you're doing it, and don't expect other people to pat you on the back. Okay. And then the third element is prayer. The third pillar of the spiritual life. So you've got the giving up, the letting go, and coming home. What is prayer except simply coming home to oneself? I'm sure those of you who've been meditating for a while will have had that feeling that you've been pushed out of your ordinary routine, and you've had to miss a meditation or the set time. But then when you do sit down and do the meditation, there's this wonderful sense that the door of your home is open to you and you're welcomed back. So even though you had been disoriented or stressed or distracted, but as soon as you sit down, you're home again. And to be in one's home is a blessed thing. So these are three things we could think about, but they need some kind of practice to accompany them. They're focal points, intentional focal points that we are conscious of. I mean, beginning of Lent should be a time where we really do think consciously about what we're going to do during these 40 days and how we're going to do it and why we're doing it. What is our motivation? Not just doing it because I've always given up crisps for Lent, but because I understand that this is for a liberation, and the liberation is a liberation from this nightmare of self-centeredness. So to have a very clear, conscious sense of what we're doing and why we're doing it. But we need practices to accompany these, what might be rather abstract ideas: fasting, almsgiving, and prayer. How are we actually going to do it? And with the prayer, I think there's no better way for us than to, if your practice of meditation is less regular and less serious than you would like, that you would like to be a better meditator, you'd like to do it more regularly, then do it. And you can have all sorts of excuses. We can always come up with excuses for not doing it. The most frequent one is what? No time. Yeah, that is no defense at all. Basically, if you're working and your chairman, boss or CEO calls you and says, "I need to see you immediately," you don't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have time." You go. It's a priority. So, the beginning of a period of spiritual practice like this is also a time for getting your priorities clear and just articulating them. Now, it may not last more than 2 or 3 days, but at least you've started. And if you start well and clearly, maybe you'll get to 40 days. So that's an obvious way of approaching the practice of prayer, to be more regular and to come to the meditation more consciously and better prepared. So if meditation has really integrated itself into your life, it's become part of your life, that's very fortunate, and you can be very grateful for that. Maybe it's still happening, maybe it's still taking time. But once meditation has become part of your life, then it continues to enrich every aspect of your life, and you, in a time like this, can refresh your intention, refresh your motivation, start again, even if you're already doing it. Those are 3 focal points that we could take for Lent and accompany each of those spiritual principles, in themselves quite abstract, but link them to a particular practice in the coming days. So why? Why do that? What does it achieve? It's a very popular word today. Everybody's got to do something to achieve something. What we achieve through these three pillars of spiritual living. Do you achieve merit? Well, in some religious minds, you do this in order to get credit, to put credit on to top up your card, your phone thing. So you gain merit in God's eyes. But it's not really in God's eyes, because God doesn't really dispense merit, reward or punishment. Not literally. It's really in our own eyes, and to feel that we have gained merit, even if we're giving that merit to somebody else in some imaginative way, I think is pretty much linked to some kind of self-satisfaction, some kind of complacency, some kind of pride, which of course Jesus warns us about in that gospel we just listened to. And that's why we need this kind of unself-consciousness that he identifies with that image of your left hand not knowing what your right hand is doing. When you're doing a good thing, don't be thinking about it. Don't be wondering what you're going to achieve or get out of it. Just do it if it seems the right thing to do, and let the good that may be in it, or the good that it is, just let that flow and let the Spirit decide where it flows. So I don't think we should think about achieving merit so much, because that's too much tied in with the ego. But we should and can, I think, see it as achieving simplicity. We should become more simple through these Lenten practices, or these three pillars of spiritual living. And what is simplicity? Simplicity is the process of disillusionment. That's why it's hard to be simple. That's why meditation is simple but not easy. It's the process of shattering or dissolving our illusions. And illusions are very difficult to get rid of. You may get rid of them in one form, but they quickly reassemble in some other form. We'll have a look at that process in a moment. And disillusionment, shattering the illusions, is, the word, if you speak about, I feel disillusioned, it doesn't usually mean I am closer to reality. We usually use that phrase to express some sadness, isn't it? I feel really disillusioned with that person. Or I'm really feeling disillusioned about politics. I've lost hope, I've lost faith, I've lost belief in someone or something that I once invested myself in and had hopes for. But again, come back to what Father John says about the experience of sin is that of self-centeredness, living the nightmare of finding only distorted images of this illusion. The state of self-centeredness is the state of illusion. It's basically the egocentric view of the universe. It's illusory, just as it was an illusion. They didn't realize it at the time. That the sun rotated around the earth. That was an illusion. And we all remember from our history books how difficult it was for the church and for scientists as well to let that illusion go. In fact, I think that illusion had been shattered a long time before Galileo. But the illusion had grown back. It was a very comforting illusion that we are at the center of the known universe. And a certain interpretation of events proves that the sun moves around the earth. And to shift from that to knowing that the earth moves around the sun is metanoia, is conversion. And it takes a big mental shift and an emotional shift. Human beings began to think of themselves very differently when they realized they were no longer the center of the universe, or their planet was no longer. So in the same way, psychologically, not just cosmologically, but psychologically, the same thing happens. We all assume instinctively that the reality revolves around me because I am immediately interpreting what happens. The person I meet, the experience I have, the thing that I'm doing, discovering, enjoying or not enjoying, we see it instinctively as something that is happening to me, and I am at the center of the situation, of the relationship, of the experience. And that is such a deeply rooted habit of mind that to shift from that, metanoia, changing the way you see things, is disillusioning. And it has, of course, a discomfort, high level of discomfort associated with it. One of the great English novels that describes that is Jane Austen's Emma. And she's convinced that her vision of the world is right, and she's moving everybody around on her chessboard in order to fulfill what she thinks is going to be good for them, marrying so-and-so to so-and-so, and she's moving everything around. She fails to recognize the true love that is in her life until all her plans collapse and crumble, and she's made to look stupid, and she is utterly humiliated, utterly, downgraded. But that is her moment. That moment of disillusionment is also her liberation and so she looks back on the past as if it were a nightmare that she had unconsciously been in. And then, fortunately, because Jane Austen is a nice person, she marries Mr. Knightley and lives happily ever after. She goes to heaven in Surrey. So this is so disillusionment is the uncomfortable, at times painful, of course, process of simplification. And that's what we are really aiming to achieve. The disillusionment is precisely that. It's the getting rid of illusions. So we shouldn't be sad about it, but we are sad when we let go of our illusions, because we are invested in them. It's our way of seeing the world. Our illusions are a network. They're not just one illusion. All our illusions or our false ways of seeing ourselves, seeing the world, seeing other people, they form a web, and they interact with each other. And pull one of them, and they all begin to destabilize. Pull harder, and you begin to see how fragile your worldview actually is, how quickly it could dissipate. It could just crash like a computer screen. So, but that's the choice, ultimately, that the human being has. To commit ourselves to love, to pursue reality, or to defend our web of illusion. Simone Weil understood this very acutely. She said that attachment is the great fabricator of illusion. Attachment. It's the Buddhist idea of attachment, but it's no less the gospel idea of sin, which is the cause, the fabricator of and the maintainer of the web of illusion, which holds us in the nightmare that Father John was describing. Imaginary evil, Simone Weil said, is romantic and varied. Imaginary evil is romantic and varied. But real evil is gloomy, monotonous, barren, and boring. So it isn't such a difficult choice when we give ourselves time to reflect on our priorities and how we can use these three focal points of spiritual living with associated practices to actually do this work of disillusionment. Illusions can take many forms, of course, not just mistaken ideas about how the universe is constructed, our ideas of other people, the way we judge them, evaluate them, the way we form habits that we may think are little treats that we're giving to ourselves, but which are actually hidden addictions, ingrained habits of character, the way we respond, react to people, to situations, gossip, slander, putting people down, not giving attention to the insignificant person in a group because we want to give attention to the celebrity. These are ingrained habits, many of them unconscious, of course, but they become conscious as soon as we begin to make an intentional decision, as soon as we become, as Father John says, decisive, and we say, this is what I'm going to do as best I can. As soon as that decision has been opened up for us, it sheds light upon many of the illusions, the habits, the addictions, the regular misinterpretations, the prejudices that form our web of illusion. And self-centeredness, as Father John describes it, really ticks all these boxes. It is the strongest attachment of all. It's the root of all attachment. We are attached to ourselves as the center of our own universe. And remember, it's disillusionment that we allow to happen. It's not so much a cognitive process or an intellectual decision or rational deduction. The disillusionment happens, we allow it to happen, and we welcome it, even if it's discomforting, through the process of detachment. And what is more direct a way of detachment than meditation? Why? Because in meditation we're taking the attention off ourselves. We are, by the very act of sitting there and saying the mantra, we are, as far as we can, and always more than we think, actually, we are re-centering from self-centeredness to reality, to God-centeredness. That's metanoia. And that is what's happening in the work of meditation. And often, because nothing happens in the meditation, we think nothing's happening. But when nothing happens, it's a pretty good sign that something is happening. And you will see the results of it before long. Meditation is simple, radically simple. But it's also what Julian of Norwich calls a condition of complete simplicity. And what does it demand, she says? A condition of complete simplicity, demanding not less than, Stefan? Than everything. And that's exactly what meditation is. We are responding to this call or to this intuition, and it's a thrilling one, to leave everything behind. That's the call of the gospel. Believe the good news of the gospel. This is what we believe, that we're capable of this, that we're called to it, and there's a great vision of reality and a great experience of life in store for us, reward, once we begin to do that, once we really engage with that practice of radical or complete simplicity. Now, against that, I mean, that's something thrilling and attractive, and we want to do it. But against that, there is a force of resistance. And it's not the devil pulling you back to eat crisps in the middle of Lent. It's sin. It's sin. It's not that eating crisps is a sin, but sin is this illusion and this attachment to what is not real. And it is actually the state of hell. We construct this idea of cause and effect by which we say hell is the punishment for sin. So, you know, one part of our mind says, okay, well, let me sin as much as I can before I have to go to hell. And it's a very materialistic, very simplistic, very childish attitude, but it's quite deeply rooted in the Christian imagination as well. And it's a result of understanding sin as the breaking of a rule that should be punished. Just as now, if you're found texting while you drive, you get 6 penalty points and £200 fine. It's as simple as that. And that idea of sin is not really the original idea of sin as we find it in the early church, but it took shape over a long period of time, and one of the forces that led to that idea of sin as an infraction of the rules that should be punished were the Celtic, the Irish monastic penitentials that were written about the 6th century. And the Irish have this slightly extremist side to them. And So monastic writers like Columbanus, for example, composed penitentials. They were kind of misused and misinterpreted perhaps afterwards, but the basic idea was that there was a list of sins that you shouldn't do, and if you did them, then there were a list of punishments to be associated with it. 6 points off your spiritual driving license. And there were special punishments for lay people and bigger punishments for clergy, supposedly. So my favorite one was the punishment for a monk who was too drunk to sing the Psalms. Obviously, it's happened more than once, and but it was quite a gentle punishment. Actually, it was simply he would be denied dinner that night. Probably he was too drunk to have dinner anyway, so he wouldn't do it. So we may be slightly misinterpreting these penitentials, but they certainly help to form this image of reward and punishment, this legalistic idea of sin as the breaking of a rule, rather than sin as the state of attachment to illusion, which is in itself hellish. It is the nightmare that Father John was talking about. And at the root of it all is this fundamental illusion of self-centeredness. I am the center of the universe. So meditation, as the Cloud of Unknowing says, dries up the root of sin within us. It's the great mystical writers, the great mystical theologians who have the better idea of what sin really is. They had to be careful in the Middle Ages, they had to be careful of how they expressed it, because they might be denied their dinner or get burned at the stake, especially if they were having steak for dinner. So, but this idea that the work of prayer, pure prayer, the work of contemplation, itself gets to the root of sin. That's a profound and exciting and redemptive insight. That all we have to do, in fact, is to be still, to pay attention, to be there, to be open, and to let go of all the forms of attachment that the mind and our self-centeredness throws up continuously by habit through the time of the meditation. Just let it go. Give it away. And in that work, however imperfect you may feel in doing that work, you are, in fact, turning around. You are, in fact, doing this work of metanoia. So this nightmare that John Main describes is like a bad dream. And we can sleepwalk through life, or large sections of our life, comfortably embedded in our web of illusions, defending them. And we don't know we're walking when we're asleep. I knew somebody once who used to sleepwalk, and his wife told me that he would, it was terrifying. He would, once he woke up, this was many years ago, but he woke up one night convinced that the house was on fire, and because it sounded so real, he convinced her that the house was on fire. So they were all both screaming fire and running around the bedroom. And then she realized he was asleep. And she ran. He said, "We've got to get out of the room." And he was opening the bedroom window on the second floor of the house and was going to jump out. Well, illusion is very powerful. Nightmares can be very directive. It can take over your life. And she managed to restrain him, hit him on the head with a frying pan or something, and eventually he woke up in his own way. So conversion, metanoia, is what John Main calls this dynamic. It's not just one thing, but it's a dynamos, an energy, a focus that liberates us from this nightmare, calling us into the pure light of day. It's a waking up. One of the great images of all the mystical traditions, all the great spiritual traditions, simply waking up. Wake up, sleeper, Christ has risen upon you, St. Paul says. The Buddha is one who is awake. So, nevertheless, illusions can be very powerful. They can reform. The web can become tight again around us at 3 o'clock in the morning. If you wake up and you've got a problem on your mind, you've got an anxiety, you've got negative thoughts at 3 o'clock in the morning, they seem very real, very oppressive. You seem trapped in them. But when dawn comes, a new day begins. And with that new day, you can jump out of bed quickly and deal with it. But you have to have that intention. So the idea of penance is something we shouldn't run away from. We should just get it right. It's not about punishment. And sin is about illusion. It's not about an attachment. It's not about simply breaking particular rules that have punishments attached to them. The word penance, the root of the word, the meaning of the word, is to feel sorry. And feeling sorry is something we should allow ourselves to do sometimes, because there's a lot to be sorrowful about in the world and about ourselves sometimes. When we realize that we could have done better, we could have fulfilled our potential more, or we could have responded to certain situations in a more generous way, or things could have been different. So sorrow is not such a bad thing, provided it doesn't become obsessive and fixated. It can be purifying, actually, to allow yourself to go through this, penthos is the Greek word for it, to go through this sorrow that Jesus calls one of the Beatitudes, actually, mourning. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. But you've got to allow yourself to mourn, instead of going around with fake happiness or artificially induced happiness. So allow yourself to mourn. And sometimes in meditation, it can be quite cathartic. It can be a release of sadness or sorrow or negativity. And another understanding of penance, apart from this idea of allowing yourself to feel sorrow, to be sorry, is the desire to be forgiven. That's something we usually have double feelings about, because to desire to be forgiven means you put yourself in the wrong, or you accept your responsibility or your blame, and we're very cautious about that because it makes us, it's not good for the ego, and it makes us vulnerable. Nevertheless, that desire to be forgiven is a liberation too, a liberation from guilt, from the obsessive, fixated remembrance of our past mistakes or the things that have been done to us. Of course, this takes discernment. And I was mentioning about those penitentials, and you could easily dismiss them as being very materialistic. and obsessive. But in fact, in many of those penitentials, the confessor, the one who was supposed to be listening to the confession, was told to pay attention to the body language of the person who was speaking and to their tone of voice. In other words, to really understand what the person was saying or not saying, what they were trying to express, what they were trying to free themselves from. And that quality of discernment is not literal punishment, but it's the quality of discernment that allows us to see where our attachments are, where the nightmare has its home, where self-centeredness has its bolts, where it's bolted down inside of us. John Main says there is a negative penance, which is that downward spiral of the ego where you just beat yourself up and you get a kind of perverse masochistic pleasure in punishing yourself. But authentic conversion, he says, is the discovery through disillusionment, the discovery that our real center is in God, in reality, and that we are a living icon of this divinity. And that's the goal of Lent, really, just to come a little closer to that self-knowledge, that true self-knowledge. In a great spiritual treatise called On Spiritual Knowledge, Didacus of Photike, it's in the Philokalia, volume 2, I think. It describes how this process of illusion begins and how attachment begins to happen. It's a remarkable insight, psychological insight really, into how all of this gets started in the mind, in the psyche. He says, evil does not exist by nature, and no one is naturally evil because God has not created anything that is evil. God saw everything that he made and it was good. But we know there is a lot of evil in the world, a lot of darkness, a lot of attachment, a lot of sadness. And where does that come from in this beautiful creation that we are polluting? And this is what he says. When in the desire of his heart, someone conceives and gives form to what in reality has no existence, then what he desires begins to exist. When through the desire of his heart, so this really deep-rooted desire, maybe a desire that arises out of a wound that we have, something we didn't receive or have early enough in our life, or some wound that's come to us through loss or rejection or betrayal. That when, this is where desire, this kind of desire arises through an unmet need or an unfulfilled part of us. When in the desire of his heart someone conceives, we are creative beings, we can imagine things. We can write the B minor Mass, or we can write Emma. So we are creative beings, we can create these imaginary worlds. But when that world comes out of this particular kind of desire, we conceive and give form to what in reality has no existence, but then what we desire begins to exist. And of course, we then begin to pursue this illusory reality, and we are driven by the further illusion that if we fulfill that desire, we will achieve everything we want. So here's a very simple, really, but I think very profound insight into how our imagination works and how imagination can work creatively or destructively, how it can become fantasy or it can become beauty. And it suggests how we easily weave our own web of illusion and pursue the figments of our fantasy. So at the beginning of Lent, it's perhaps useful for us to reflect on some of these words, some of these realities, because they affect how we live and how we feel and how we wake up in the morning and how we go to bed at night. They shape our lives, and we are capable of being free from them. That's the message of the Gospel at the beginning of Lent. That should give us a good boost into these 40 days. And to see those three focal points that I mentioned: fasting, giving up; almsgiving, letting go; and prayer, coming home to oneself. To see those three focal points and find ways in which we can actually implement them or practice them, put them into reality. And let's focus on prayer, because prayer is really the essential unspinner of illusion. Prayer reverses, deep prayer reverses the spinning of illusion. It unweaves the web of illusion. So if we had one thing to do during Lent, I think we couldn't do better than to refresh our sense of the gift of meditation and the great power of meditation to set us free, to wake us up, and to open our lives, our minds, our hearts to our true self as living icons of the divine.